A genius surgeon seeks revenge by transforming his daughter's boyfriend into a woman. But in this twisted tale of obsession, nothing is as it seems. The protagonist, Robert, is an experienced plastic surgeon and a single father. 6 years ago, Robert's wife, Gal, abandoned both him and their daughter to elope with her lover. However, their car was involved in a serious accident, unexpectedly catching fire. While her lover miraculously survived, Gal was severely burned, losing the beauty she once prided herself on. Despite his wife's betrayal, Robert adopted a remarkably forgiving attitude. One could say he had the patience of a saint, or the tolerance of a man with deep pockets and shallow wisdom. He meticulously treated Gal's injuries and devoted himself to restoring her former beauty, tirelessly researching skin transplant techniques. However, limited by the technological constraints of the time, all his countless experiments ended in failure. In despair, Gal could not face the reality of her disfigurement and ultimately chose to end her life by jumping off a building. Their 12-year-old daughter, Norma, witnessed her mother's tragic passing firsthand, which led to severe psychological trauma. Robert had no choice but to send Norma to a psychiatric hospital for professional treatment. After 6 years of therapy, Norma's condition finally improved. Following the advice of her psychologist, Robert brought his daughter home and began caring for her attentively. One night, father and daughter attended a wedding reception hosted by one of Robert's friends. At the party, the uneasy and socially awkward Norma caught the eye of a young guest named Vicente. The two quickly hit it off and eventually left the party together, heading to a nearby forest to be alone. However, just when things became intimate, Norma suddenly had a psychological episode, struggling and screaming. Vicente, who had just taken some recreational drugs and was in a mentally hazy state, did not stop his actions. Instead, he covered Norma's mouth with his hand until she bit him hard, snapping him back to reality. Panicking, Vicente knocked Norma unconscious and fled the scene. Meanwhile, Robert, searching for his daughter, saw Vicente running out of the woods. Sensing something was wrong, he approached the area and was horrified to find Norma unconscious on the ground, disheveled. Instantly, he realized that his daughter had likely been assaulted. To make matters worse, after this incident, Norma's mental health deteriorated even further. Before long, she followed in her mother's footsteps, jumping to her death. Devastated by the loss of his daughter, Robert swore revenge against the culprit. He soon discovered Vicente's identity. The young man co-owned a tailor shop with his mother and spent his free time riding motorcycles aimlessly. One night, Robert seized the opportunity when Vicente went out for a ride. He followed him in his car, tailing him to a deserted road. Then, without hesitation, he slammed on the gas, ramming into Vicente. Before Vicente could even process what had happened, Robert injected him with an anesthetic, causing him to pass out. When Vicente regained consciousness, he found himself shackled with iron chains in a dark basement. A basin of clear water beside him was his only company. Desperate, Vicente cried out for help, but no one responded. For the next few days, he barely survived by drinking from the basin. Just as he felt he was about to starve to death, Robert finally appeared. At this point, Vicente still had no idea about Robert's relationship with Norma, nor did he know that Norma had died. Terrified, he questioned Robert, demanding to know why he was being imprisoned. But Robert remained silent. The next day, Robert brought in a high-pressure water hose and doused Vicente with cold water. Then, he gave him a bowl of rice. After Vicente had eaten his fill, Robert suddenly pulled out a gleaming scalpel. Vicente thought Robert was about to kill him and looked at him in horror. But to his surprise, Robert merely used the scalpel to shave off his facial hair. Then, he pressed a cloth soaked in anesthetic over Vicente's face, knocking him out once again. When Vicente woke up, he discovered that Robert had gathered a team of his colleagues and performed a physical castration on him. Stunned, Vicente couldn't comprehend why this stranger would go to such extreme lengths. He had no past grievances with Robert. So why had Robert decided to ruin his life and rob him of his future? Only then did Robert finally reveal his identity and explain the entire sequence of events. Upon learning that his impulsive actions had triggered Norma's relapse and led to her demise, Vicente was consumed with guilt. He thought that being castrated was the worst punishment Robert could inflict upon him, that their grudge would end there. But he was wrong. Robert had no intention of letting him go. In fact, Robert's revenge had only just begun. Over the next few months, Vicente was forced to undergo a series of gender reassignment surgeries. Bit by bit, he was transformed from a heterosexual man into an unmistakably biological woman. But Robert's obsession didn't stop there. Out of his own twisted desire, he reshaped Vicente's face to resemble his late wife, Gal, and gave him a new name, Vera. From that moment on, Vera became Robert's personal lab rat. Confined in his home, and forced to participate in various skin grafting experiments. The truth was, Robert had never been able to move past his failure to restore Gal's beauty, which had ultimately led to her passing. He had spent years obsessively researching synthetic skin. Recently, his experiments had finally succeeded. Using genetic engineering, he developed a new type of artificial skin, one that was not only smooth and lifelike but also resistant to burns and insect bites. Soon, Robert transplanted this revolutionary synthetic skin onto Vera. Because Vera had a naturally slender frame, once the transformation was complete, combined with plastic surgery and skin grafting, he had fully become a stunningly beautiful woman, with an elegant figure and soft, sweet voice. However, Vera, who is now a woman, despised the changes to her body and rejected her new identity. She attempted to escape multiple times, but each time she failed. In utter despair, Vera even tried to end her own life, but each time Robert, with his exceptional medical skills, managed to bring her back from the brink of death. To prevent her from attempting self-harm or escaping again, he locked her in a separate bedroom and assigned his lifelong housekeeper, Marilia, to monitor her every move. Additionally, in an effort to make Vera accept her new identity as a woman, Robert only allowed her to watch female-oriented television programs. He also provided her with an array of beautiful dresses and makeup. At first, Vera would tear the dresses apart and throw the cosmetics into the trash. But as time passed, she gradually grew accustomed to her female identity. Not only did she stop trying to escape or take her own life, but she also began to pass the time by following TV programs to practice yoga. Eventually, she even started applying makeup on herself. 6 years passed in the blink of an eye. By this time, Vera had fully adapted to her gender transformation. She let her hair grow long naturally, wore elegant dresses, and seemed at peace with her new existence. During these years, Robert would often watch Vera through surveillance cameras, admiring the body he had meticulously reshaped. Over time, his deep-seated hatred began to fade. Instead, an inexplicable sense of attraction took its place. Vera, too, seemed to notice the shift in Robert's emotions. Perhaps it was the prolonged captivity that led her to develop Stockholm Syndrome, or maybe, over time, she genuinely grew attached to Robert. One day, as Robert was conducting a routine medical checkup on Vera, she unexpectedly threw herself into his arms. To his shock, she even suggested that they get married and live together openly. Robert was so startled by Vera's sudden passion that he fled the room in a panic. However, this scene was witnessed through surveillance by his housekeeper, Marilia. Worried that Robert was falling deeper into this twisted relationship, Marilia advised him to kill Vera before it was too late. After all, Vera was his own creation. Aside from Robert and Marilia, no one else in the world knew of her existence. Killing her would be completely untraceable. But by now, Robert was utterly bewitched by Vera. He couldn't bring himself to harm her. After much deliberation, he decided to continue maintaining this peculiar relationship. However, an unexpected turn of events would soon change everything. That day, after Robert left for work, an uninvited guest appeared at his home. This man, nicknamed Zeka, was Marilia's son. A street thug who had been involved in numerous crimes, Zeka was currently on the run for robbing a jewelry store. Desperate to evade the police, he sought refuge at his mother's house and demanded that Robert perform plastic surgery on him to alter his appearance. Upon learning of her son's intentions, Marilia tried to dissuade him, warning that such a request would only lead to his demise, because Zeka was the former lover of Robert's wife Gal. Robert had harbored deep hatred for him ever since the affair. Now, asking Robert to perform his surgery was no different from stepping into a death trap. Trying to protect her son, Marilia set out a full meal for him and urged him to leave as soon as he finished eating. But fate had other plans. While eating, Zeka accidentally caught a glimpse of the surveillance screen where he saw Vera. She looked exactly like Gal. A wave of lust surged within Zeka. Unable to resist his desires, he demanded to see Vera. Marilia immediately sensed danger. Pulling out a gun, she warned her son to leave at once, but Zeka easily overpowered her, tying her to a chair. Under coercion, Marilia had no choice but to hand over the key to Vera's room. Consumed by uncontrollable desire, Zeka barged into the room and assaulted Vera. At that very moment, Robert returned home from work. What he saw sent him into a blinding rage. Without hesitation, he pulled out a gun and shot Zeka dead on the spot. Realizing he had just committed murder, Robert swiftly drove Zeka's body to a remote location and buried it. Meanwhile, Marilia took care of cleaning up the blood-stained bed. Perhaps it was the weight of years of unspoken secrets, or the shock of recent events, but in that moment, Marilia chose to reveal a startling truth to the still shaken Vera. Robert and Zeka were actually half-brothers. Over 40 years ago, Robert's father had a wife who was unable to conceive. In order to continue his bloodline, he secretly had a child with their maid, Marilia. That child was Robert. However, to protect his reputation, he publicly claimed that Robert was the biological son of his wife. Years later, Marilia had another child, Zika, with a male servant of the family. Compared to the unruly and reckless Zika, Marilia clearly favored Robert, who had built a successful career as a surgeon. But Robert remained unaware of his true parentage. He had no idea that Marilia was actually his biological mother. As if that revelation wasn't shocking enough, Marilia went on to expose the entire web of entanglement. Robert's love-hate relationship with his wife Gal, the twisted brotherly rivalry over her, and the horrifying truth that Robert had transformed Vera into Gal's exact image through plastic surgery. Hearing all of this, Vera was overwhelmed with conflicted emotions. A deep sense of sympathy for Robert arose within her. Perhaps for the first time, she saw the pain and torment that had shaped him into the man he had become. Meanwhile, after witnessing Zeka assaulting Vera and personally ending his life, Robert could no longer deny the truth. He had fallen in love with Vera. He no longer rejected her advances, nor did he keep her locked away in her room. Instead, he allowed Vera to roam freely around the villa. With the physical and emotional barriers gone, their relationship intensified quickly. Soon, they were sharing the same bed. Robert was so enchanted that he even considered early retirement, ready to leave his surgical career behind and spend his days indulging in Vera's company. One day, Vera suddenly suggested that she wanted to go out shopping with Marilia. Robert hesitated for a moment but eventually agreed, though he secretly instructed Marilia to keep a close watch on her. Shortly after Vera and Marilia left, an unexpected visitor arrived at the villa. Robert's colleague, Fulgencio. However, he wasn't alone. He brought along a newspaper. On the front page was a missing person report for someone named Vicente. At this point, many readers might have forgotten who Vicente was. It turned out that Vicente's mother had never stopped searching for her son in the 6 years since their disappearance. Fulgencio, who had once assisted Robert in Vicente's gender reassignment surgery, realized the connection upon seeing the missing person report. At the time, Robert had claimed that Vicente had willingly chosen to undergo the procedure. But now, with the missing person notice, Fulgencio finally grasped the grim truth. Robert had likely kidnapped Vicente and, by falsifying his consent, performed the surgery on him against his will. However, Fulgencio's visit wasn't driven by a sense of justice. He had no intention of exposing Robert's crimes or seeking justice for Vicente. Instead, he had his own agenda. He wanted to blackmail Robert. His demand was that Robert must rent out the villa to him as a new surgical clinic. Given its secluded location and built-in medical facilities, the villa was the perfect place for clients seeking discreet cosmetic or gender reassignment procedures. But there was one major issue. The villa was Robert's family estate, and there was no way he would ever agree to such a deal. Just as the two men reached an impasse, Vera and Marilia returned from their shopping trip. Upon learning of Fulgencio's demand, Vera immediately intervened. With a calm and unwavering voice, she insisted that she had undergone the transformation of her own free will and had never been kidnapped or forced into surgery. Hearing this, Fulgencio had no choice but to accept her words and leave empty-handed. Vera's unexpected defense of Robert completely dissolved the last of his suspicions. That night, as Vera and Robert prepared for bed, she casually mentioned that she had bought him a gift while shopping. She told him it was in her bag downstairs. She rushed downstairs and slipped into Robert's study. There, she found the newspaper Fulgencio had brought. Her eyes scanned over the missing person notice, and her old face stared back at her. A fierce determination flashed in her gaze. Quietly, she retrieved Robert's gun from the drawer and hid it in her bag. When she returned to the bedroom, Robert's eyes lit up with eager anticipation, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Vera reached into her bag, but instead of a gift, she pulled out the gun. Before Robert could react, she pulled the trigger and the gunshot shattered the silence of the night. Marilia, startled awake by the noise, grabbed her own firearm and rushed upstairs. But as soon as she entered the room, she was met with a gruesome sight: Robert's lifeless body, and Vera was nowhere to be seen. Before Marilia could make sense of what had happened, a second gunshot rang out. Vera, who had been hiding under the bed, fired a precise shot, killing Marilia instantly. It turned out that Vera's months of obedience and submission had all been an act, a carefully crafted facade to gain Robert's trust. In the end, Vera escaped the prison that had held her captive for 6 years and finally returned to her mother. But when she stood before her, her mother failed to recognize the stunning woman in front of her. After all, how could she possibly imagine that this beautiful stranger was once her missing son?